Hey everyone, this is Roland Wright, aka Victor, aka Vagrant Drifter, back again with another Exodus Player podcast. This is Thoughtstream episode 4, and today I'm joined by, of course, Alex, aka Sky Guy. Welcome.
Hello.
And so today we're going to be talking about the East Coast 2019 qualifiers and the West Coast 2019 qualifiers. Both have now completed, and we have those deck lists up to kind of dissect, as well as just the event as a whole, and maybe speculate on what we might see at the Worlds 2019 event. So, without further ado, how about we just jump into those East Coast qualifiers, which happened first. Um,
hmm
and we have the news page up here. So, Alex, it looks like, from what I recall, the turnout to this qualifier was like 8 people, 7 people, something like that. And
Right.
our top three is pretty interesting, right? We have in first place this kind of destruction, energy destruction deck, kind of. You can tell what the direction of the deck is, right?
Right. It's what I played today at our casual tournament that we had today.
Did you run the Chief Bandit?
No, I did not because I knew you can tell it's only in there to deal with the guy directly underneath him at second place.
Right, yeah. So this deck, which was run by Zachary M, who won the East Coast qualifier and got an automatic invitation to Worlds, it consists of 22 main deck cards, 9 creatures, which is a really large creature count for a 22 card deck. So we have a Chief Bandit, 2 Tanglewood Snags, 2 Dream Blossom Dragons, 2 Amber Shard Sirens, and 2 Ephemera in there. Um, which shocks me about this deck is it's running Ephemera, and one thing we noticed is that the top 3 were all running Ephemera as well. Um, which Ephemera is definitely like this gamble kind of card, right? It's going to be dead to you the entire game. I mean, it's a creature, but it's not going to have any abilities for the entire game, all hinging on the idea that you might have this insane early game burst.
Which the whole point, you're right, especially i- if you're not playing her in a 20 card deck, because the whole point is you want to get her in your opening
Mm-hmm.
hand.
Mm-hmm.
So if you only put one of her in a 23 card deck, then what's the point? Wouldn't you want to put 2 of her in a 20 card deck
Yeah.
so that it's more likely you're going to get that? But no, these other decks, like the third place one, is a all creature deck, and there's only one of it.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, it's at 20 cards, but again, second place deck has one ephemera, but it's 23 cards, and even first place is at 22.
Yeah, and I think if you're ever looking, to our audience, if you're ever looking at running Ephemera for any kind of deck, honestly, she's a card that really doesn't belong in any specific deck. When you're looking at Angels, they're just like that. They don't have like a strategy that synergizes with themselves. They kind of slot in at random, um, or just in beatdowns in general. That's where we see Ephemera usually. When you're looking at putting Ephemera in a deck, you want your deck to be exactly 20, no greater than that generally, because the smaller your deck count is, the higher chance you have of drawing her. Now, 22 cards, 2 extra cards, that might not seem a lot, but you go from having a 1 in 10 chance, 10% chance of drawing Ephemera with just each individual draw, to having a 1 in 11 chance of drawing an ephemera, and that small percent increase can still really add up when you're playing a best 2 of 3. um, and at that point you got to start thinking, like, is it even worth running in this deck? uh, I feel like, so that was the rare dragon deck. Those were Zachary's deck, the guy who came in first place. Those were the 9 creatures. His symmetry are kind of standard. We have 2 glimpse, 2 cove, 2 vortex, 2 unsummon, 2 chains, a reversion, and then we have a drifter's dueling in this deck.
Which seems to be something consistent of all the East Coast decks. They seem to like running 2 Drifters Duelings in all their
Hmm.
decks.
Yeah, that is true. Both first and second ran double drifters. Scrolling down, I don't see it I don't see it in anyone else. I do see it in one other deck. Yeah.
The
Drifter's
hand control
Dueling.
deck.
Yeah, and Drifter's Dueling is a good card. Like, don't get me wrong, but there is and isn't a place for it. In an energy destruction deck, which is what this first place deck is, I think that could have been cut out to drop the total to 20. You know, because the downside to Drifter's Dueling is it's, once again, it's not getting you anything. You're playing a card to remove a card from your opponent's hand, so the value of the card is essentially zero. But, if you're getting rid of something important, that's great. And that's why, like, you might see this with a Treeforge Complex. You bounce the Symmetry to the top of your opponent's deck, then play Treeforge Complex to hurt them. And I played this last year at Worlds with my Sierra's OTK deck. And the reason being is when you're running a deck that needs to build this large hand, where you need to build an important combo in your hand, that was what Sierra's OTK was. I had to wait until this golden turn to play a bunch of cards at once. Drifter's Dueling is the way that you ensure that A, your opponent doesn't have Vortex, so they can't nuke your hand, and B, that when you are going for this big combo, you get rid of any disruptors. And now we kind of see Harpoon Halberdier, the secret rare Shardfolk. He kind of does that better for Shardfolk than Drifter's Dueling did. But my only guess is maybe Zachary uses it to also remove energy from hand. So that's my guess, is maybe the Drifter's Dueling is in there as a way to destroy hand energy. Because if you're unaware, if you Drifter's Dueling an energy in a player's hand, it doesn't go to the top of their main deck, it goes back to their energy deck. So it's essentially destroying an energy. But anyway, so that was what the first place player got. We've kind of played around with it. Playing with other players' decks, especially if you haven't seen it yourself, is always tricky, because it's not just the deck list, it's how the player plays it, right? There's a lot of people who play Shardfolk, and they even play the kind of Sierra's build that I ran at Worlds, or other iterations of it, but they do not play it anything like how I played it. In fact, when I played my Sierra's OTK build, nobody had ever really seen the way I played it. So at Worlds, when I played another player who was like, yeah, I hope you don't mind, I copied your deck for today, he did really bad. And that's because he just didn't understand the decision making that goes into every play that deck has. Even if a deck is proven to be really strong, the decisions that you have to make, the situations and circumstances that you face as a player that plays that deck constantly, that gives you an edge over someone who just adopts it, right? So we've tested Zach's deck. We've had trouble with it. Maybe he brings it to Worlds. I know that these East Coast players have talked about having other decks kind of in secret. We haven't seen them. Maybe we see this again at Worlds and we can see how it's played. Or maybe not. So, all right, and moving on to second place at the East Coast Qualifiers, we have Sean P., who's running a freeze deck. This was the Sierra's kit of double Sierra's, double Chief Bandit, double Awakened, double Starship Glacia, and one Ephemera for 9 creatures, 23 card main deck. His Symmetry kit was a Leech, a Vortex, 2 Glimpse, 2 Drifters, 2 Coves, 2 Chains, 2 Unsummons, and 2 Reversions. And then he was running the Abyssal Ridge Harmony Rare. So what are your thoughts on this deck?
Yeah. So does the Harmony Rare count as
No.
one in the main deck?
No.
Okay.
Does not count as one in the main deck. And interesting enough, for those of you out there, the Harmony Rare is not a Shardfolk. I remember I played against Existence Games.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's not a Shardfolk. I can't remember the creature type.
Oh, it's its own type.
Yeah, correct. And I played against Existence Games, and they built a deck that was designed under the assumption it was a Shardfolk, which was amusing because if it was a Shardfolk, it'd be really good. It'd be way better than it is now.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it is amusing. I'm looking up the type right now. But anyway,
I'm going into the database right now.
So what are your thoughts on this creature, this deck? It's a Grand Wonder Ocean, by the way.
Okay. Why Uh, number. This is going to be why only one of blank.
Oh
Why
yeah,
only
yeah.
one of Ephemera? Why only one of Leech? Why only one of Vortex?
Yeah,
Mainly the symmetries is what I would focus on.
sometimes we don't know what people's collections are like too, right?
Yeah.
It could be that. It could just be like, oh, you don't have something else. Because we've known a lot of players. I remember at Worlds last year, the player who won the Worlds, Rebecca, on day
Hmm.
one, she only had one Covenant deck because she didn't have a second Shardvale deck. And so
Right.
that night they went out and bought another one, and so day two she had two coves. But that's a common thing is people are running with what they can have. So that's a possibility. Um, we talked about how the quite a few of these players seem to like Ephemera and Drifter's Dueling. Um, I think for a Shardfolk deck, Ephemera isn't a crazy choice just because if you do nail an Ephemera in the opening hand, it can really help that Sierras OTK strategy. The weird thing, and this makes me think, the deck's called Mass Freeze. I don't think he's going for the OTK. Once again, um, because Glacial Drift, Abyssal Ridge isn't a Shardfolk, it cannot attack directly with Sierras. Um, and so the double Chief Bandit is kind of my sign to me that like this deck kind of runs in two ways. It's like, okay, if I can awaken Star Glacier and Starship Glacia into a Sierras to win early, great. Otherwise, I can Abyssal Ridge out, and then from then on, I have tons of Chief Bandit fuel to just bulldoze my way through the game. That's the way I kind of see it. I think, um, once again, we talked about this before. Running 23 main deck cards and then putting Ephemera in it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Um,
Yeah.
the unsummon, the unsummon is interesting because the thing about Awaken Star Glacier is you kind of benefit from your opponent having more creatures in play. Glacial
You
Drift
mean the
and
two unsummons, right?
yeah, both unsummons. Yeah,
Okay.
Glacial Drift and Abyssal Ridge, or sorry, Abyssal Ridge, Glacial Drift also benefit from your opponent having more creatures in play. You of course run this weird gambit too, where you get Abyssal Ridge out, you go to unsummon an opponent's creature, and they reversion it, and you have to unsummon your own creature. Right? Those are situations you have to avoid as a player in general. Is playing unsummon when your opponent only has one creature out and you have creatures out because they can easily turn it on you. Um, yeah, the one leech is also a little strange. Usually you either run no leeches because you just have a lot of energy generation, which this deck seems to have, or you run two. It's interesting actually thinking about it. The first place deck, Zach's deck, does Zachary M. His deck does not have
Hmm.
leech. It's an energy destruction deck that has no leech.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
That was
that.
a little. Yeah, it was a little. It's the same deck I was playing against you today. It's a little weird,
Yeah.
but I never had problems removing energy from the field.
Um, yeah. So anyway, that's Sean P's deck. I guess it seems like he's going to be bringing it to Worlds because he's talked about wanting to bring 1,000 card energy deck um, to I'm assuming for these Abyssal Ridge Chief Bandit plays. We'll see how that turns out, I guess. Okay, and moving on to third place, we aren't going to examine all of the turnout. We're just going to examine the top three here. But moving on to third place, we have an all creature deck. Not going to read all the creatures. It's just a lot of the kind of um, general high value creatures. Like really, when you think about an all creature deck, your options aren't really that large. You're going to pick guys that have really powerful abilities that don't need synergies, right? Um, in the article, I think it mentions that he made this deck just a few minutes before the qualifiers. It was mostly because there was a player who was running a symmetry deck and an all symmetry deck, and it wasn't running Star Struggle, and therefore, well, actually in the deck list it is running Star Struggle, but you would think that this deck does really good against True Forge Complex because you don't have any symmetries. It is a 20 card main deck as well. I'm a little surprised this made top three in all creature deck. All creature decks are generally very, very bad. Um, they have a lot of weaknesses to them, like an incredible amount of weaknesses to them. But then
Right.
again, depending on your local ecosystem, it might not matter, right? If you could, for instance, you Alex could probably play an all creature deck against one of our newer younger players and win within reason, right?
Right.
Nothing about this deck really shocks me. Like there's nothing in here that I'd be like, oh, why would he put that in here? All these kind of things do make sense.
Right. Yeah, those are probably the best choices you could pick. Honestly, it's the one deck where I see Amethyst Voidcap actually being used well.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to.
Yeah.
But it's super, like I said, it's super vulnerable to a lot of symmetries. Just absolutely tear this apart. As for the rest of the decks, like I said, we're not going to really dive deep into them. There was a deck that tried to focus around Reglyphis and some of the newer dragons, like Clock Dragon. There was a all symmetry deck that curiously ran Glacial Ridge, or Glacial Drift, or Abyssal Ridge.
For whatever reason.
Yeah, there was a hand control deck that, similar to, well, not super similar, but I've kind of looked into this before. I ran a deck that ran double Harpoon, double Emburia, double Drifters Dueling. It would have been interesting to see this place top because hand control is kind of a fun little niche. And then another freeze deck, Crystalline Stag, Frozen Claymore, and Chief Bandit. But it doesn't look like it made it. Which I'm a little surprised because if you're playing against, there's 2 players with Abyssal Ridge, I would feel like a Shardfolk deck like this with 2 Chief Bandits and a Stag should have a field day. But oh well. So that was the East Coast qualifiers. Like I said, I think there was about 7 or 8 players based off of this list. It looks like 7 players. This was the first qualifier tournament for the East Coast since they started competitive seasons, right? Last year they did not have one. This is their first year, and I think it was in New York, if I'm recalling correctly.
It is. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So that's awesome. It sounds like the top 2 or 3 of these guys will be showing up at Worlds, which is great. Looking forward to seeing them fly out here. And big congratulations to these guys to take those top 3 spots and get your invitations to Worlds. Now, we weren't there, so there's only so much we could talk about. We were going to have a guest join us today from that tournament who was going to talk more about the decks they ran and the decks they saw and all that jazz. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it. So there's not a whole lot more we can talk about, but we can talk a lot about West Coast because that's where you and I attended. So
that's where you and I taught.
Yeah, so West Coast qualifiers. Man, that was a big, long event. I think it was like 24 players. We played 5 rounds.
Yeah, this was the hugest turnout for this we have ever had. I think last time it was like 10.
Last time it was 9. Last West Coast, yeah. And I think part of that is a sign at how well Converging Chasms did. The season 1 was very stale. There was, just one really dominant deck and, S tier deck, which was Angel Beatdown, and the rest, every other deck just could not reach it. And I think also it was the first competitive season, so a lot of people probably weren't super invested in it. But anyway, for whatever, for those reasons, I think we just didn't see a large turnout last year. But this year we got, 3 times the size, 24 players. It was 5 rounds of just, what would you call it, tournament style?
It was Swiss, and then the very end of it was a top 8 elimination.
Okay, so 5 rounds Swiss, and then top 8s competed in a single elimination tournament. So I came in first. I was running Shardfolk Beatdown. Alex, you came in second. You were playing Forest Struggle, is what you called your deck. It was essentially
I unfortunately called it Forest Struggle. I had to think of something because suddenly they were just like, "Oh, you have to name it too," and I'm like, "What? Oh god!"
But essentially, you're running a Symmetry deck with some creatures teched in there, which I like. It adds a different dimension to what is otherwise a very boring deck to play against.
I love how people assume it's I don't know. People think of it more like a Symmetry deck, but I always think of it more like just a creature deck.
Yeah, I mean, you don't actually. Yeah, when you look at we'll get to the deck list, but when you look at the deck list, I think you're absolutely right. It actually is. it's because I've seen you run a more all symmetry focused one of this, where it was double Mistry, and then you had the rest of the symmetry deck, uh, all symmetry kind of build in there. But this one, no. Anyway, we'll get to that. So starting off with my deck, I ran a Shardfolk Beatdown. It's 2 Chief Bandit, 2 Harpoon Halberdier, 2 Crystalline Stag, and a Planetary Crag of Cosmos. It's 7 creatures. 21 card main deck. So my general opinion of main decks is a 7 creature to 14 card symmetry split is a really good ratio. Um, Depending on the deck, like Reveal likes to run 8 to either. I mean, I think 8 to 13 is ideal. 8 to 12 would be kind of pushing it. But anyway, so that was the creature build. The symmetry build was also pretty standard. 2 Glimpse, 2 Cove, 2 Vortex, 2 Chains, 2 Leech, 2 Unsummons, a Reversion, and an Existence of Unknown Origin. And the Existence of Unknown Origin was something I teched in at the previous day. I removed Invoke and I ran with this instead. It also changed up my playstyle a lot from what I had previously been running.
Yeah, especially against me. It basically was. I almost want to say it was there for all the symmetry decks that were going to be there, that you knew were going to be there.
Yeah, well, Existence of Unknown Origin is unfortunately one of the best counters to Existence of Unknown Origin. So, which isn't usually a great thing in a game, but whatever. The Shardfolk as a whole, like the Planetary Crag of Cosmos, is actually an interesting thing. Nobody else has run this card, and I actually, the more I play with it, the more I'm like, yeah, this is a really good card to run one of in here, because there have been a lot of times there's like I have a really strong, Chief Bandit, for instance, and I'm about to go for game, and my opponent's like, well, I literally can't stop you because my unsummon is just going to go right on your Planetary Crag. And it's this weird thing where it almost functions as this kind of almost as a Crystal Cove in because it's just forcing my opponent to ditch a symmetry to then play a second symmetry. And when you combine that with Harpoon Halberdier, it just makes it really hard for your opponent to get over. So I had a lot of fun playing with this deck. I would not run the Harmony Rare in it, though. The Harmony Rare is just too chaotic. It doesn't help me at all, since the passive effect is to freeze a creature in play, and I don't have creatures in play most of the game. And allowing my opponent to potentially just permanently freeze my entire field would just completely ruin it, almost. But yeah, so then we can look at your deck. Your deck was 20 cards, main deck, 2 Mistry Driftwoods, 2 Ephemera, 2 Star Struggles for symmetry, 2 Chains, 2 Unsummon, 2 Crystal Coves, 2 Leech, 2 Vortex, 2 Glimpse, 2 Existence. So how do you feel about your deck?
You know what? I made this deck just so randomly. I was trying to do like I've done before, which is an all symmetry deck with just 2 creatures, where you're just drawing and creating piles and buffing those piles, and then finally at the end of the chain of all the draw cards, you just drop the 2 creatures on your huge piles and attack for whatever. And I remember that deck that I had made past, I had gotten like these huge piles, but as soon as I put them down, they're unsummoned, or I get chained.
Yeah. I mean, and that it reminds me. I mean, it's very much a lot like the Sierra OTK in the sense that you're investing a lot in this idea of a direct attack, and it's really cool when it comes off. The biggest weakness is you're so vulnerable to a lot chains and summon reversion. Of course, I mean, funnily enough, Vortex doesn't affect your deck nearly as much as it would a Sierra's deck. But what does affect your deck is Crystalline Stag, because you build up this large pile and then I freeze it, right? I think that actually happened in one of our games, and
yeah, I was definitely just trying to, because I wouldn't say you're letting me do damage, but at the same time you're like, I couldn't do a lot. I basically just start struggling, and that was it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I don't think you played this deck a lot before this. I think you might have played it at 1 or 2 tournaments. So
I had originally no Star Struggles, but in place
Yeah.
of the Star Struggles, I had Treeforge Complexes,
Yeah, that's right.
and
Yeah.
I was afraid that someone was gonna try and be funny and try and build the all creature deck,
Yeah.
copy from the third place East Coast qualifier guy, and I was like, well, okay, I need a way to get around that because if I'm
Yeah.
unfortunately paired up against the all creature guy, I lost half of my the I lost one of the win conditions of my deck now.
Yeah. All right, moving on to third place. Now, this one's interesting because, as we all know, this was an upset uh, placing.
Yes.
This place was taken by a younger and newer player named Caleb D, who I didn't get to see all of his games. I only got to see, or not even get to see, but I only got to really hear about the one that was between third and fourth place. It was him and Big Zach from Discord. Um, Big Zach was running an all symmetry deck, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, I eliminated him in top eight, and so he played Caleb to determine who got third and fourth place. Now, that all symmetry deck is really pretty good and can beat a lot of major decks. The unfortunate part, not ironic, the unfortunate part is Caleb's deck is a massive hard counter to symmetry decks. One that, I mean, we didn't really think about at the moment because nobody was playing it, but he's running a Karstri the Chemical Oddity deck. And the all symmetry deck that Big Zach was running has no creature control in it at all. And in fact,
It's all draw and cut your own life points.
yeah, and it also gives your opponent a bunch of energy via things like uh, Glimpse, Isles of the Morning Star,
Isles of the Morning Star,
Traverse the
yeah.
Treetops if it's a multi-type creature.
Oh,
So
if you're going first with the Symmetry deck and you play Traverse the Treetops, both of you guys get to draw an extra card.
yeah, exactly. So there was a lot going for Caleb in this third and fourth place match, and he destroyed Big Zach both games, which is really fortunate. But I told him, man, you got to run Leech in that thing. He refused. But anyway, so Caleb's deck is 6 creatures, and then 21 card main deck. So the other the other 15 cards is Symmetry. So he's running double Karstri Chemical Oddity. That's the structure deck Karstri that essentially blows up to deal direct damage. You have 2 Wishwaker Willows and 2 Wildfire Willows for his uncommon and common, respectively. 1 Vortex, which I'm a little surprised is in there. 2 Reversions, 2 Unsummons, 2 Chains, 2 Leeches, 2 Reevaluates, 2 Coves, and 2 Glimpses. So
To me, it makes sense to me, that deck.
I don't know.
Vortex, yeah, it's good for disruption, but he was mainly focusing on if he had the creatures in hand, he didn't want them at that time, so he would just reevaluate all of them away to get more draw and buff energy piles to the field. Because he just wanted the stacks. He just in the early game, that deck just wants stacks and stacks of energy everywhere.
I see. So he's not 100% focused on the Karstri O2K.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's you know what? If you're right, if Big Zach had run Leech, oh man, that would have made that deck a little more.
Well, yeah,
it would have made that matchup more difficult.
Oh, I'm about to trigger. First off, when he was running Leech, which was before this qualifier, when Big Zach was running Leech, it actually made it hard for you as the other player to build energy on field, because he would just leech the piles multiple times in a turn and prevent you from benefiting from Glimpse, really. And on top of that, if your opponent's going for this Karstri OTK, all it takes is 1 leech. Drop it down from 10 or whatever, drop it down to 9, and then you're still alive.
Then existence and Star Struggle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so that's something. I think once again, this all goes back to it's how a person plays the deck. I look at this and I see the Vortex and reevaluates and I'm like, I don't get it. Because any deck that's about building a hand combo does not want Vortex to reevaluate. But as you're telling me, his strategy isn't necessarily to do that right away. It's more of just, get my field up as big as possible early on. By just
when he actually does play the creatures, he doesn't he wants to make sure that even if something gets reversioned or unsummoned, that he can just put it back down in another pile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is true. I mean, the thing is though, I mean, like, okay, I'm playing Cars 3. Oh, you want to reversion my Wish Waker Willow? Well, then Cars 3 fails. So I mean, like him having other blank piles doesn't really matter. I think if anything, it's just I guess so he can reversion maybe his own Cars 3 and then do that. That's my only thought on that one. But anywho, so regardless, he was able to get third, which is pretty awesome. It's exciting to see someone just who he wouldn't have been able to go to Worlds had he not placed in third. And
I think he
so,
maybe had like 2 or 3 points.
yeah, and so because he was able to place, he gets to go to Worlds. That's really awesome. It's cool that players who come in late don't feel like they have no chance, right? If you practice, you build a really good deck, you show up and you perform really well, you still can potentially go. That's how I got to go to Worlds last year. I started playing in March. Come May, when qualifiers were there, I went and played. I placed in second, so I got to go to Worlds that year. And now Caleb's getting to do the same thing, which is pretty cool. Wasn't really at the cost, like, so at this turnout of 24 players, like 12 or 13 of us were from Fresno. Um, so it's not like it really hurt any of those players. Like Big Zach is still going to Worlds. All the other players, or all the other Fresno players that were in top 8 are still going to Worlds, uh, because at the end of the day, they were that high on the leaderboard, right?
Even a few of them that have never even
One,
placed
yeah,
in a single tournament.
yeah,
Yeah, simply because they got a point for coming to
yeah.
each tournament.
Yeah, so for those of you listening to this who, maybe you don't win your local tournaments or whatever, if you just show up consistently one tournament every week, you will get enough points to go to Worlds if you really wanted to. We have a player who's never won a single tournament, and yet they have enough points to go to Worlds, and that's because they played in like 30 tournaments during the year. Um, and so it's not, it's essentially one of those things where you have like three ways you can get to Worlds. You play in every tournament, you win a lot of tournaments, or you win in a qualifier, you place top three. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. Now, obviously, things will change. Like next year, it's going to be a little different because it's 2v2 tournaments. Um, and and also, I mean,
Yeah, I wonder if there's going to be like 2 separate worlds, maybe one for singles and one for
no,
teams.
no, in the magazine it says it's only 2v2.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and I mean they could change their mind, but um, what's also interesting is if they start to open up other qualifier tournaments, less people at each individual qualifier get an automatic invite. So they
Yeah.
have implied that they want to keep it at 6. So if there are 3 qualifier tournaments, like one in East, one in West, and one in Singapore, only the top 2 get invites. And then, if there's 4 qualifiers, then, they might do only the top 1 of each of them or something. Or, essentially,
Mhm.
like they want to, the Worlds is always going to stay, or so far the Worlds is at 16. It could always grow. It could go back to 24. It can go back to, another higher number the more players there are. But,
Right.
so the rest of the top 8 were also pretty varied. We had Big Zach who came in 4th. He had an all symmetry deck. We have
Which
another.
actually the set that's on the page is actually wrong. There weren't if I understand correctly, there were not reversions in the deck.
Yeah, there almost
This
wouldn't.
is yeah, this is what he told me. He said there were no reversions in the deck. So it was
Okay.
actually 20 cards, not 22.
Yeah, because he wouldn't have lost to the Carcery.
Yeah.
Oh well, whatever. I guess spelling error. I don't know. Um,
Typo.
so 5th place, we have another player named Edward. He was running Angel Beatdown. Uh, this is very much just the kind of evolution of what Angel Beatdown was last year. So,
Yeah.
Angel Beatdown last year, we had Alana, Buria, and Lantern Leaflore. This year, this player has been running Castle, Ephemera, and Mistrai, sometimes Leaflore. Um, it's, once again, like I said, it's not a burst deck. It's a deck that just wants to outpace you by constantly gaining advantage. using things like unsummon and leech to uh, suppress your opponent. Vortex, of course, a big deal. Getting that turn one ephemera ability is a big deal. All that stuff. So
Right.
it is still, I would still place this deck at the top of A tier. But
Yeah.
once again, it also depends on who's driving it and how much experience they have with it.
Right.
Sixth place, we have another player, Bella. They're running Shardfolk as well. They're running the kind of typical Shardfolk setup: double Starship Glacia, double Awakened, double Chief Bandit, double Sierras. The funny thing about this player, they're also running double Vortex. The funny thing about this player is they're running it as a beatdown deck, and if I can attack directly, I get to attack directly, cool. But other than that, they're running it as a beatdown, which I think for Shardfolk, there are just better alternatives to that. I mean, Awakened, I guess, is nice with Chief Bandit. Like, you could definitely do, like, Awakened and Stag for just large amounts of freeze going on. But
Yeah.
I feel like when you include Sierras in a deck, when you even include Starship Glacia in a deck, you're pretty much saying, I want to go for OTKs. So it's one of those like mixed identity kind of crisis decks that I think is going to struggle so long as you can't decide what the deck is supposed to succeed at.
I mean, she's got all the resources that she needs, just like a beatdown deck. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very beat
But
down.
again, if you're going to put Sierras in it, why not? I don't know, structure the deck around it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other good alternatives to putting Sirius in that deck at this point. Like, Halberdier is really good, just as the hand control gives Chief Bandit some more energy targets. And like I said, Crystalline Stag is just great at freezing a pile of energy, gives Chief Bandit a bunch of energy, prevents your opponent from summoning there. So
Yeah.
there are certainly better alternatives, I think, and I think that's something that this player is gonna have to look at going into Worlds. Seventh place, we have Tom. He's running Immortal Angels. This was an interesting one. I think he double Paladin's Parable, double Castle, double Timeless Angel, double Emburius. The Timeless Angel is just a meme card. Like, it's a cool effect, but as of right now, the use cases for it are very limited. Because it's it is essentially a recurring blank creature.
Yeah.
I mean, it's vulnerable to leech big time. I mean, any other kind of creature removal besides just battling. But, I mean, in general, it's not doing a ton for you besides ensuring that you always have a creature to play.
The only time the only instance I can see it being more useful is if there is an upcoming symmetry that like requires the cost of a creature from either the field or the hand.
Yeah, I mean, and you can. I think over time, Timeless Angel definitely does have that potential of coming back. Ways where like, oh, I have a card that requires that I discard a card from hand to activate, so I'm just gonna run Timeless Angel into somebody, send it back to hand, then play it, or my opponent's gonna run into Timeless Angel. Like Vernegis you can kind of do something interesting like that with them too. You can have Timeless Angel run into your opponent to get a card in hand for Vernegis' ability, or if your opponent's trying to kill Vernegis, you can have Vernegis copy Timeless Angel's ability, so he goes back in hand. So there's,
Yep.
It's an interesting card. I think it can get better, but he's obviously making more of a themed deck versus a functional one in a way. Although,
Yeah, he tends to do that a lot. Yeah.
yeah, I
It's
mean,
usually either all angels or all
Paladin's
this or that.
Parable,
Yeah.
Castle, and Embury are all great cards. Like, he has 6 of his creatures are, top tier creatures to be running. It's just, I think Timeless is bringing the deck down, especially when he has a 24 card main deck. I think he's also running Harmonized. When I actually played him during this qualifier tournament, and he might have had a better chance against me if he was playing Harmonized differently. He played Harmonized I think multiple times throughout our games. But every time he played it, he just used it to draw another card.
Oh my god.
And it's
Okay, the whole point of putting the two harmonize and two Emberias in the deck is so that you get 4 discards.
yeah. Well, and on top of that, if you're gonna have a 24 card deck and you're gonna use Harmonize to draw cards, then just take Harmonize out of the deck. Like if you have 20
Yeah.
cards, I can see you drawing from deck. Or if
Yeah,
you're
if
in
you're
a
never going to use its discard ability,
yeah, if
and
you're
you're
in a
not going to use it as a
pinch,
draw.
if you're in a pinch and you needed to draw, sure. But yeah, it and it was like, oh god, I only have a cove in my hand, and he plays Harmonize. I'm like, no, please don't, please don't. He's like, I'm gonna draw. I'm like, oh, thank God. And then like, all right, he plays a cove. I'll cove it. Thanks for leaving this in my hand. Like, so
Yeah.
it's one of those things. I think he if he unless he drops his deck count to 20, like I think he could probably take out both Timeless. Um, Honestly, he also running 2 invokes. Take an invoke out, and then if you want to leave the harmonized in, at least you've dropped your deck count to 21. Um, so
An easy fix would just take two timeless out, take 2 harmonize out, and there you go. You're
yeah,
at 20.
well yeah, the double invoke though still could be replaced because he's not running any vortex either. Um, the thing about harmonize though is going back to Drifter's Dueling. It's a value 0 card. Drifter's Dueling in a way, obviously like the value can differentiate based off the situation, just like what your opponent has in hand, right? If I harmonize and my opponent gets rid of something I didn't want them using, then sure, that's extra value. But in general, I'm playing a card to force my opponent to discard a card, so we're both down a card. So I didn't get any value out of it, right? Unless the card they discarded was good. Um, the difference,
Okay, that makes a little more sense now. Okay, now I'm thinking about it.
yeah,
Yeah, you're right.
and the difference with Drifter's Dueling is, in a way, Drifter's Dueling can be way better than that because you get to look at your opponent's hand, so you get hand knowledge. You're also sending the card to the top of the deck. Sure, you're not discarding it like Harmonized, but you get hand knowledge. You send it to the top of deck, which means their next draw is essentially only 2 cards because they're just drawing a card that they have lost effectively. Um,
Yeah.
but unlike Harmonized, if my opponent has a glimpse in hand, they can just glimpse back whatever they pitch to top of deck. So yeah, fun little tip. If you're ever playing against someone who's running Drifter's Dueling, and you're running Glimpse of Sanctuary, which you should be, leave Glimpse in hand. Don't ever use Glimpse. Just leave it in hand, and it shuts down Drifter's Dueling completely. But anyway, so yeah, Harmonized is a card that gets better the more cards that are introduced to the game that trigger based off of discarding something, right? Like if I have a creature in play that gains an energy every time my opponent discards a card, right? You can run Harmonized. Um, Once again, you can also run like Cloudburst Spiral, which is another hand destruction card, but it requires a little bit more finesse to it. But
Yeah. The only time I ever put harmonize in the deck was when I was purposefully trying to make a destruction control deck, which the deck had 2 harmonized, 2 drifters dueling, the 2 Emberia. It was basically just going after the hand,
yeah,
and it was not great.
yeah. I mean, well, and the other downside of Harmonize is I play Harmonize, and then my opponent responds by destroying one of my creatures somehow, right? And it's like, well, then Harmonize fizzles, and
Yeah.
I think yeah, at some point you just say, well, I'm just gonna replace Harmonize with Drifter's Dueling, or I'm just not gonna use Harmonize at all. But whatever. Um, so moving on to eighth place was Charles. Charles was an LA player who unfortunately like pretty much barely played the entire year, but they ended up placing top 8. So kudos to Charles.
Yeah.
Charles was running a 27 card main deck, which is I think the largest one on this top 8. Yeah,
Yeah, on the top 8, yeah.
yeah, and
Not at the whole tournament, though.
no, not the whole tournament.
Not even close.
The strange thing about Charles' deck is he's running 2 copies of just some cards and then 1 copy of a bunch of others.
It's 2 copies of, as far as the creatures go, the only 2 copy is Mistray. And the rest is 1 Cursory Veil, 1 Lantern Leaf Lord, 1 Grandiose, 1 Ember Shard Siren, 1 Lazarus, 1 Casil, 1 Starbound Glacier, 1 Ethel, and 1 Alana.
Yeah, it's 11 creatures in a 27 card deck.
It's just all over the place.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because when you do that, you lose consistency. it makes it harder for your opponent to predict what might be coming, and that's nice. Like I played him. I played him during the Swiss tournament, and he actually got the very first game. He got off on me, and he beat me on turn two. Um, he,
Oh, nice.
yeah, turn one he went first. He played Alana, so it comes in a 4 energy. Goes to me. I just had two creatures in the Cove in hand. I didn't want to play him, so I said, all right, go ahead. I don't know what's in his deck at this point. His turn, he goes 3 energy. He knows I have nothing in hand, so he goes Cars 3 Veil, attacks with Alana, then moves all of Alana's energy to Cars 3 Veil and attacks with him for 7. So that's 11 damage, and I just lost turn 2. And that's because I don't know what's in his deck. It's, obviously, even if I did, it'd be hard to predict what's going on. But then from then on, I realized, like, oh, I can't risk that happening. Yeah. But, that's something interesting. His Symmetry kit is also a little strange. 2 Existence, 2 Cove, 2 Leech, 2 Vortex, Twin Summon, 2 Chains. Nothing shocking there. But then he's also running 1 Apparition's Grove, 1 Departure, 1 Glimpse, and 1 Carter. I think a lot of that stuff really hurt him. The Apparition's Grove pretty much never did anything for him.
I know from talking to him, he did say he wanted it in there so that he could switch out something for Legendary Blade Lazarus, but it's like you only have one of them in there. Then.
So yeah, that's typically what people think about when they think of Apparition's Grove is Lazarus, because you swing, Grove, Lazarus, swing again, you essentially attack 3 times with the same pile of energy. But even, like you said, only 1 Lazarus. Even then, he doesn't have like a phenomenal just lineup to really build around that, because you also need to build the energy for that play. Also only running 1 Alana and 1 Grandiose, because like a play you could do is like I have a pile of 3, Grandiose attacks, move the energy in, Apparition's Grove into Lazarus, attack, right? You could also do the same thing with Carcer Veil out, move the energy to Carcer Veil, attack, Apparition's Grove, blah blah. But the thing is it's the same problem with Mistray Driftwood, like your deck and Mistray Driftwood in general, is you're putting a lot of value into one creature. It works when you're looking at Lantern Leaflore, because Leaflore is immune to almost everything that can stop it. But when you're putting that on something like Lazarus, Carcer Veil, Mistray Driftwood, any of these cards, they're all vulnerable to Unsummon, Reversion, even just Leech can mess things up. And of course Chains. And so there's a lot of counters to that, and when you're running only 1 copy of all these guys, it becomes an inconsistent play strategy. So it's a really interesting and fun deck, and this is kind of the things I like to see, just because it's not something I would experience at a local tournament where people are building decks with more knowledge of how deck building should be.
Right, yeah.
But regardless, he still made it to 8th. He's a really good player. He thinks things through a lot. And I think because of that, he's able to make some really good decisions during gameplay. So those are the top decks at East Coast and West Coast.
Yes.
So with all that said and done, let's talk about like the actual turnout, how we felt about this. Like we said, 24 players, way more than last year. I think it was awesome. Everyone had a lot of fun. The tournament ended up being essentially 6 hours, which was a lot, but when you're going to something like this, you're going with the understanding that something like that might happen. With all of that said and done, what do you think we're going to see at Worlds? What kind of decks do you think?
At this point, it's hard to tell, especially from the East Coast point of view. It seems like they like to run Drifters Dueling a lot, so I'm thinking we're going to see that teched into a lot of decks coming from their side.
Yeah, but remember, they have a lot of secret decks they want to talk about.
Oh yeah, they also have a lot of Harmony Rares, don't they?
Yeah, the Harmony Rares will be interesting because nobody in Fresno really plays with them. I mean, there's one player, but that doesn't really count. Because in general, and I think we talked about Harmony Rares last time. They're really just not that good. The Reveal one is better than
easily the best one.
Yeah,
you can actually
use it.
Yeah, you can actually use it. It actually flows with the deck and how a Reveal deck is supposed to go off very, very well.
Right. But the downside of this is most people from Fresno just don't know really how to play against it either. So
Yeah.
I could totally see a situation where the players of the Bissell Ridge come in and people don't know how to play against it. We're fortunate in the sense that someone has been playing that every week, so people who do go against it know like I should save my unsummons, I should save my even my reversions, stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
and it's if ever you wanted a sign that staples are staples for a reason, it's because of stuff like this. You need unsummon for cards like Abyssal Ridge and Chief Bandit who can come in with massive amounts of energy. Because it's one thing, sure, if my opponent's running Angel Beatdown, I can counter that with a lot of other decks in a way. Maybe not in a sense that I'll win, but I don't need Unsummon to beat it. I mean, a lot of the times the Angel Beatdown creatures are even at 2 or 1 energy. That's not the problem, right? But when you're running creatures who have come in and they come in on like 20 energy, you cannot beat that by just running into it with other creatures.
Yeah.
You need a symmetry or an ability to actually get that energy off field. And that's why Unsummon is a staple. That's why so many people run it, is because if you play someone who comes in with this massive, bulky creature, you need that card to deal with it because you can't fight it normally. You're just going to lose. And this is why Lantern Leaf Lore was so heavily used last season, because the idea was, well, Glimpse and Leech a big pile, throw Leaf Lore on. What are you going to do? Like you can't use Unsummon anymore. There's almost no creature abilities to deal with it. Fortunately, now there are a lot more counters to it. We have a lot of freeze counters to it. You have even like Castle and Parable are good counters to that. Parable in general is like if you ever were like, I don't want to run Unsummon in a deck, Parable is a good alternative to that. She's essentially the creature version of Unsummon almost. But you still have to play her. You still have to attack with her. There's still a lot of there's more counterplay to her than there is for unsummons, but
But when her
regardless.
attack does get through, it's a massive swing
Right,
in your
exactly.
favor.
And like it's essentially, while it might have more counters than unsummon, it also can potentially give you a bunch of energy as well. So that's why like, Parable's by far the best secret rare for that reason alone. Um, so yeah, I think the Harmony rares can definitely have like a big impact on the game, but fortunately, I do think a lot of players do know how to play against it. We'll see. We'll see how that turns out. In general, it is a very chaotic element. It's hard to kind of predict how a game goes with the Harmony rare involved. Um,
I really hope someone brings the one that cuts you brings you back to life after
oh, jeez.
you've hit 0 life points.
Yeah.
What is it? Eventide Paradoxal Planet, or what's Chaos Chasm?
Yeah. Yep.
Chaos Chasm. Yes.
I don't
When
know that
you
that one, man. That one feels just so random. It is like, because like, cool, you did that to me, and now I can either win because I have this 10 energy creature, and there's nothing in play, or I lose because you're running like Star Struggle or Plague Spire or
also
whatever.
also it's very hard to not have energy to pay for it on summon when it finally activates, because its continuous effect on the field side is that every player draws an extra energy.
Well, except it destroys everything in play. So you'd have to essentially keep energy in hand. I think if you're playing it, you keep 1 or 2 energy in hand at all times.
Yeah, and it's good because it gives you that extra energy. You can always play your 3 energy each
Yeah.
turn.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, like the big counter to that card is, and I don't want to talk too much about Harmony Rares, but the big counter to that card is, uh, I could kill you right now, but I'm not going to until I draw my own summon reversion, right? Um, because I need some way to play against this thing. I don't know. There's a lot of weirdness with it. But anyway, so in regards to, so yeah, I agree. In regards to East Coast decks, it's hard to kind of predict what they're going to bring. They've talked about having all these other secret decks, and of course people make changes and stuff. I remember last year, the day before Worlds, I teched in a Ethel in my Shardfolk OTK, and it actually paid off. Players do that all the time. I teched in Existence for qualifiers. Decks just change as you continue to iterate and play test with them.
Yeah.
I think Symmetry is going to be there. Although as of right now, it's really looking like Big Zach and maybe you might be the only players interested in running it. I think Big Zach definitely. Um, you know, you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where your head's at there. I'm not going to ask you to tell me, but um, the rest of the players in that top list do not seem to be interested in Symmetry, which is great because it's not busted, but it's really not fun to play against, and it is definitely, you know, top of A tier as well.
The only downside is that if at some point during your massively just drawing into card into card into card, that you just after playing everything that you just draw something that isn't a draw, a +1, then your whole deck just stalls and you just have to end your turn there and you're wide open.
Yeah, I mean I think you called it a solitaire deck, and that was a good kind of
Yeah,
analogy.
it's like plain solitaire. Yeah.
Yeah, you're playing by you're when you're playing a Symmetry deck, you're essentially playing by yourself, but
Yeah.
if it's this weird thing where if either you're both playing, you're at this point you're both saying both of us are playing on thin ice. If I make a mistake, you can just go for game, and if you make a mistake, I can capitalize on it big time, right? And today I was playing a new version of this all symmetry deck where it was much more control oriented. It had unsummon, it had leech, it had cataclysm. Um, it was essentially the player was just, I'm just going to draw all my cards. I'm never going to play energy. I'm not going to play anything. I'm just going to, well, he got energy out and then he would glimpse and leech, so it stayed big essentially. But after that, he never played energy again. And he was like, I'm just going to keep drawing cards. If you want to attack me, go ahead, because I'm either going to unsummon your creatures or I'm going to take the hit and then existence and kill you. And so that deck terrified me because it's one of those situations where I I think if you're in a bad matchup, you just lose.
Yeah.
You have no way of countering it. And like I almost I maybe could have had a chance, but then I went second in game three, and like that was it. He vortexed me, and I
Okay.
was like, all right.
Okay, so that deck had no life point cutting. Like
No,
there was no secluded shortcut in it. No.
nope.
Wow.
Yeah, it
I
was
would say just let a pile build up to 10
can't
and then attack.
can't
Oh yeah, he has a leech.
double leech, double cataclysm.
Mm,
And so, you know, like I said, it was a bad matchup for me. I was playing a Roxanne deck, um, which is
yeah.
very anti-creature and does not have any energy gain whatsoever. Uh, so
Yeah.
besides glimpse and leech, so like there was no way for me to explode and blow through him. The closest thing I had was, and I went for the play was I managed to get two piles of three out, and my opponent had only 8 energy left. In hand, I had Reversion and Nebula Wood Barrier, so I could swing for 6, Reversion 1, and Nebula Wood Barrier in, and swing for another 3 and end game. But like I said, he's running double on summons as well, so it's just it's a very hard deck to get through, and I think in general symmetry decks just are not fun because, and this is to me this is just existence of unknown origins fault. Existence were already, or sorry, symmetry decks were already unfun to play against and play with, but existence just makes it so that now the only way for a player to win is if they can win in one turn. Before it was, if I can get some damage in, great. Now it's, you know, if I can get damage in, I'm making progress. Now it's, I literally cannot attack you until I have enough energy to attack. Oh, you have unsummon, cool. You know, I think if I was running Shardfolk, maybe because then I could stag, freeze his pile, and then have multiple Chief Bandits out to have, you know, he wouldn't have a good unsummon target essentially. By the way, all this was with one Coven deck. He didn't even have 2 coves. But like the crazy thing is it didn't matter because he would just play reevaluate and shuffle 11 cards in and draw 11 new ones. Like he just could get every single card because of how it just worked because of the double leech and stuff. And this is why I've told Big Zach, you need to run double leech. It's so good. It's so
Yeah.
important, and I think even unsummon at this point might even be good. But yeah,
And that's why I call it a solitaire deck, because you keep playing and putting things down until you can't put anything down
yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
And then you just have to stop and you lost the game.
Yeah, and then you see, and then when if you do win, all your cards, that little bouncy thing where they bounce to the bottom of the screen, and then they bounce a little bit more, and it makes like a
Yes, all
cleanup
your
effect.
energy bounces away and
Yeah.
leaves little trails. Yes.
But yeah, so so anyway, back to the point. We're gonna obviously see a bunch of shard folk there. We're gonna see some at least one angel beatdown, maybe two or three. We're gonna see at least one symmetry deck, maybe two. Um, I think we're going to see maybe one reveal. It's funny that really almost nobody's been playing reveal, even though reveal is also an A tier deck. It's just like at our local tournament, there's only one player or two players who have been playing reveal, and they don't even come every week. They come like once a month, once every other month. So um, I think they did get world invites. I'm not sure if they're going. I think one of them might be going. I'm not sure. But anyway, uh, so
One of them is going. Yeah, Anthony will be.
yeah. So we will see a good amount of diversity this year, which is great. Last year, it was all just Angel Beatdown. This is all it really was. I mean, like there were other decks that attempted to go other routes, but the meta just did not allow for it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And
I know
this
firsthand.
yeah, and this year I think, it set forward to a lot of great things. It made a lot of decks either A tier or at least high B tier. Um, I think if you want to look at like the big four, it's Symmetry, Angel Beat, Shardfolk Beat, and Reveal. And then in B tier we have like Common Dragons, um, and maybe Common Angels. Uh, I think there's one player who goes to our tournaments who does play like Common Angels every week, so they might bring that to Worlds. I don't know. They're also the type of player who will out of nowhere bring Angel Beatdown because they know it wins games. Um, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see. What I like about it is, and going into Worlds, Alex, like the thing that you always have to keep it. Like some people always go into things like, "I'm gonna win. I can't wait to come in first this time." Da da da. It's not realistic. In any competitive sport, the best team can still lose just one game, and that's all it takes. And when you're
Yeah.
playing elimination games, which is what like Worlds Day 2 was last year and what the end of qualifiers was, all it takes, you could have the best deck, you could be the best player, but one bad matchup or two unlucky matches in a row, and you're eliminated. So I think when we're going to Worlds 2019 and we're hopefully going to see a lot more viable decks, it's possible for anyone to get eliminated early on. Even if I run, the best deck I can conceive of, and I absolutely dominate my first opponent, it's looking great, and maybe I should be able to beat my second opponent, but I don't, and I lose, and I'm eliminated, right? And last year it didn't feel like that. Last year it just felt like the four players who ran Angel Beatdown the entire year, they're just gonna win. We pretty much all knew that like day one, and that's what
Yeah.
happened essentially. Um, this year I don't get that feeling because like Angel Beatdown has been proven to lose against All Symmetry. All Symmetry has been proven to lose against Reveal and against Shardfolk. It's this weird kind of almost rock paper scissors circle where some decks beat other decks, but those decks beat other decks, and those decks beat the first decks. And so I think Worlds 2019 is going to shape up to be a very interesting and fun year for that reason. Just like qualifiers, we saw some upsets and other things.
So what you're saying is the first two sets there was only rock, and then the next two sets, paper and scissors were released.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say up to set three, it was pretty much there was only rock. Because like all set three really did was just give everybody Cove, and that was it.
Yeah. Some
Um,
people did write chart folk. I did run the chart folks, but I just ran two each of the three starters from the shard folk, and that was it.
yeah, I
And
mean that was
that was the deck.
that was pretty much all you could run. Like Starbound
And
Glacier and
then
all that
just
stuff didn't do anything.
and then just run the regular beatdown symmetry.
Yep.
So yeah, 6 plus 14. There's your 20 card shard folk deck at the time.
Yeah, it just wasn't enough, unfortunately, especially because of cards, because like Angel Beatdown had so much control to it. Um,
Which I think that's Bella's deck.
uh,
Is
well,
it
yeah, but I mean, you also have
six place?
Starship Galacia.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
once that released, Shardfolk had a little bit more power, fighting power to them. Um, but yeah, set five, we're not going to see any more Angel or Dragon support. So my thing is like season three, we may actually start seeing Angel Beatdown just die completely potentially. I mean, there's still Chronos and their afterthoughts can blend into any deck, so there's still a pretty strong possibility that they allow Angel Beatdown to continue to survive and thrive. But we're gonna also be seeing a lot of other play styles emerge. I think we get a lot of shard folk and tree folk support according to the magazine, and those are already really solid factions right now. So getting more of them makes me think that there's even a higher chance that they ascend past Angel Beatdown finally. So it also depends on the new symmetries that come out too.
Also, the new rules are well for at least for two people playing two v two. It's going to be what you're either Chrono or Eventide. You're either Chrono
Yeah,
or everything else. Oh.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and oh God, that's a good point. That's just
Yeah,
another reason that Angel Beatdown might just fade out completely. Because I think the only way Angel Beatdown can evolve from here is with Chronos, and if you can't run both of them in a deck, then because of 2v2 rules, then you're out of luck. But
that just means that Chrono Beatdown is just going to be the thing now.
well, yeah, and I think that's their intention. They want to see Chrono Beatdowns versus things like Shardfolk and Reveal, um, which uh, makes sense. I do think it's kind of a shame that Chronos are designed where their mechanic just does not care what deck they're in. Um, it
They're the most splashable cards I think we've ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, I think there's some elements to them that aren't splashable, right? Like the Erodo ones, like the one that
Oh, I don't even count that as a new Chrono, even though it is. I don't even count it because I
yeah.
don't know.
Well, it doesn't even have an afterthought, right?
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
so I say
it's true.
Chrono Afterthought Beatdown is probably
Oh,
the better
double
word for
Eroda
it.
deck, 2v2.
Chrono Beatdown, like splashing Chrono into Angel Beatdown, seeing those decks, I'm looking more forward towards. I'm looking. I'm really. How do I say? Um, what's really going to excite me in the next set is people just mixing Angel Beatdown with Chrono and just seeing what type of mix-ups, what kind of fun combinations they'll do. But nothing's gonna. Man, the way Chronos synergize with each other is almost scary. So I see like people playing pure Chronos is like Chronos is going to be S tier deck of next year. Quote me on that.
Quote you on that. All right, I'll keep that in mind. I think you're right. They do have an incredible amounts of value to them. Um, And that's why I said like what we really gotta wait and see is what the symmetry look like, because symmetry are cards that they generally don't care what archetype you are. Unlike creature types, they actually can matter. Symmetries might point out an archetype or a mechanic, and that's fine. But there are also a lot of very generic symmetries that you try to find ways to slot them into things. So I'm interested to see what we get from that. I'm hoping set 5 adds a lot more than that because in general symmetries are just such a powerful force in the game, right? Most decks are a majority symmetry. I don't know if that was ever their intention when they were designing the game. Most decks are like, you know, 7 creature, 14 symmetry. Like you have 2 symmetry for every 1 creature in your deck. You know,
Yeah, this is true.
like
Like
when
every
you
deck is symmetry dependent, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Magic the Gathering or even like Yu-Gi-Oh, most of the time it's an even balance between your spells and stuff and your creatures. I think in Exodus the reason it isn't is because of how the pile system works. Me having 3 creatures in hand means I have to put them on piles of 1, which generally is very dangerous to do because of card energy destruction. But in the same token, putting them all in one pile is dangerous because of cards like Unsummon. So players kind of build this idea of, well, I need a lot of symmetry to support when I do put a creature on a larger pile. Things like Reversion Cove, even their own Leech and Glimpse to generate energy on other piles. So I think, going back to Chrono, the crazy thing about Chrono is they shrink any deck they're in because they just go to Afterthoughts, and now your deck is a card smaller each time you do it. So I can run 8 Chronos in my deck, then 2 other creature, and then like the rest symmetries, and eventually my deck's just going to become 12 cards. 2 creatures and a bunch of symmetries, and you can cycle through that so fast. Like, just in general, like, there's so many different things you could do there. And some of them just give you really, really good passive abilities. Some of them not really. Like the Carcery, the new Carcery card, I think, is the Maniacal Madness one. I think that one's like an example of a bad afterthought. But a lot of the other ones have really solid ones, like reduce the direct damage you take by 1.
Yeah, any effects that your opponents would play that attack or damage your life points are just moot.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite one.
Well, and what's crazy about that card is that might single-handedly kill symmetry decks, and I think that's cool. It's so cool to just the fact that one card can release. Well, it's so cool and also so scary at the same time. But one card can release, and you're suddenly like, I can't run symmetry anymore because I might play someone using this card, and now like my whole deck's dead. And so you kind of have to innovate. Like if you're running symmetry at that point, you have to start looking at, do I run Mistrai? Because if I am playing against someone who has the anti-burn, then I need another way to get that kind of damage in. And
I like kind of the idea that my deck that I took to Qualifier was built around.
Yeah, and I like it because it keeps things fresh. It keeps people from just falling in. That's the downside to Angel Beatdown. Is Angel Beatdown now is effectively the same it was last season, just with newer cards, kind of, and that sucks.
And it's really like created this template for all the best decks, which is leaning more towards symmetry and then just splash the 6 or 8 creatures in a deck, and then there's your deck.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that get changed up, right? Like, supposedly they have a Vortex counter that they're releasing. That's going to make, once again, people think twice about putting Vortex in a deck.
There's going to be at least, we don't know what the card is yet, but we know something is going to be used to, like, stop afterthoughts.
Yeah, I think they confirmed when I talked to them, but there's no way that there isn't. Well, yeah. So we talked about that 1 set 5 card that prevents more than one afterthought from being destroyed. So
yeah, which means that there's going to be something at least, maybe just one card
something that nukes the afterthoughts, and so like that card in itself also means that you can't overly rely on. I think you could still probably play an afterthought deck because you've nuked them, now they're creatures again, and most of the afterthought creatures still have pretty good abilities. Like Wonderwolf has a pretty good ability, Convoluted Coalescence, all these other guys, they all in addition to being good afterthoughts, they also are good creatures. So even if you nuke it, okay, that sucks, it puts me back, but not a big deal, I get my creatures back, right? Right. Whereas at least like when you're looking at like a Vortex counter in some regards, or if you're looking at, we have the afterthought that stops symmetries. Those things will actively make people reconsider building decks around it. Like just the same way that, you reconsider putting Star Struggle in because you might go against someone who's all creature or even, Carcery deck.
Yeah, I actually did play a game against Big Zach where I made a proxy of that afterthought, that Chrono afterthought that stops your opponent's effects from basically nukes the symmetry deck.
Yeah.
Stops symmetry abilities or creature abilities from doing damage to you. And I put it down, reversioned it, made it into an afterthought, and he just likes it. Put his hand down. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
I was like, what? He's like, my only way of damaging you was Star Struggle and Treeforge Complex. So I literally with that card, and I can't remove it.
Yeah.
So literally, you just won the game. I was like, oh, okay. Well.
before anyone says, well, then just shouldn't everyone run that card? Whatever the
Yeah.
afterthought removal cards are, a Symmetry deck is definitely going to have to run them, hands down. Like if you want to continue running Symmetry in Season 3, you're going to have to run whatever cards get introduced that remove afterthoughts, because you can't risk having your entire deck strategy. I mean, the cool thing is if you're running 2v2 and you're both running Symmetry decks, one player can run that card and the other player doesn't, right? That's
Right.
not a big deal. Or you each run one copy of whatever removes afterthoughts.
I just want to see the game of the fool that brings the Symmetry deck with no afterthought removal, and just I want to see that deck just get turned off.
The moment they realize, like, they just stare at their hand and then stare at their opponent, they're just like, well,
Yeah.
it's the same thing as when a player plays Treeforge Complex and they realize their opponent's entire deck is creatures. But yeah, you know that. Yeah, I think if we're looking at set 5, yeah, I mean a lot of the decks we're gonna see now are gonna change a lot. And that's great. I think season 3 is gonna be a completely different beast than season 2, for that reason.
Yeah, the game just keeps showing how it's evolving more and more, and the way it evolves is just it gets wackier and wackier.
Yeah, I just hope that someday Existence of Unknown Origins gets banned.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Ah! All right, do you have
I
any?
know it's such a broken card, which is why I tend to build decks around that card because it's just it's so unfair, that
Yeah.
card.
So anything else you want to add?
No, I'm looking forward to Worlds now, and especially super hyped since the second day is on my birthday. So hey, not bad.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Alex, and thanks to all of you for listening to this episode. I'll see you guys next time.
See you at Worlds.